As astronauts from a host of nations advanced mankind's research in space, some eagle-eyed Earthbound viewers believe they've spotted aliens studying us. NASA has more resources than any other space organization, including top-tier financing and cutting-edge technology, one of which is the International Space Station, ISS. A lot of time has passed since the ISS first went up in 1998. Its inaugural module, Zarya, was launched, and since the year 2000, crews have maintained constant staffing of the orbital complex. A quarter of the global population has never known a world without the ISS due to how long it has been circling the Earth. NASA's mission is to serve the public interest, therefore, it broadcasts live feeds of astronauts operating on the ISS and shares all of its findings with the world. Or so we thought. Recently, NASA's dirty laundry was aired to the public as it was discovered that they shut down the live broadcast of the ISS after it came in contact with something unearthing. Is there something that NASA doesn't want us to see in this footage, and how many more of such live feeds has NASA robbed us of viewing? Join us as we take a closer look at why NASA shuts down the live feed after something massive shows up at the International Space Station. A wide variety of things are broadcast on a regular basis by NASA. Every one of its space launches, including the most significant ones, is broadcast live, as are any landings on other planets, such as the Perseverance rover's 2021 touchdown on Mars. It's true that signals from space take time to reach Earth, and thus any film from space won't be considered live at all. On average, it takes around 20 minutes for Earth and Mars to communicate. However, the ISS is much closer to Earth than Mars, and though there is still some lag time, it is negligible compared to what the astronauts on board experience. This allows us to interact with them, and they frequently conduct interviews from the station. In addition to specific spacewalks and repairs, NASA also provides broader live streaming of the ISS, allowing viewers to see Earth from orbit in all its magnificence. Just to reiterate, there are instances when the signal isn't strong enough to make the feed appear live, but people still watch it. And from time to time, some very bizarre things have been picked up on camera. In July 2016, eagle-eyed viewers of NASA's ISS stream spotted a UFO in the footage as it descends into Earth's atmosphere. The object appears as a tiny brilliant dot, and what makes this meteorite-looking object even more peculiar is that NASA's stream abruptly went dark right before the object was going to enter Earth's upper atmosphere. If the object had been permitted to fall to Earth without any alterations to the footage, it would have probably been easy to dismiss this as a typical piece of trash. But viewers quickly started to wonder if NASA had intentionally disabled the feed so no one could see evidence of extraterrestrial life. NASA officials clarified that the transmission cutoff occurs because, on occasion, the ISS is too far away to receive the signal correctly. The rebuttal, however, maintained that this was them trying to cover up the presence of an alien spacecraft. Then again, if NASA did know aliens were out there around Earth and also wanted to hide it, they probably wouldn't broadcast genuine live streams from the ISS in the first place. The mysterious Black Knight satellite is at the heart of one of the most prominent conspiracy theories surrounding NASA's photo and video broadcasts. This picture, first published in 1998, managed to captivate the audience. Since the photo first surfaced, ethologists have claimed that the plain black object depicted therein is an extraterrestrial spy satellite. Its shape is difficult to discern, and NASA denies the claim, with space experts suggesting that the object is probably just a thermal blanket or some other common type of space junk. There are countless bits of space junk floating around, and this thermal blanket, in particular, is thought to have fallen from the first space shuttle flight to the ISS during a spacewalk. But this picture isn't where the Black Knight satellite theory began. It's something that people have been attempting to prove for decades, and this handy picture ended up in the theory. However, the object has never been recovered to definitively identify its true nature, and the situation remains peculiar. More concrete reports of UFOs have surfaced since then. Another UFO was captured by ISS cameras in February 2020. Much like in 2016, this time the feed didn't ominously cut out, and viewers saw an unidentified object seemingly following the space station for a full 20 minutes. People focusing on this footage were slower to jump to the conclusion that the object must be alien in nature, with theories instead centering on the United States' top-secret orbital test vehicle, the X-37B, a reusable spaceplane. Although the X-37B has been photographed several times, no one understands its purpose when it is in orbit conducting missions. It operates entirely autonomously, with no human intervention, and sometimes publishes the results of its experiments. Still, clandestine espionage missions also frequently employ it. There are those who believe the UFO captured in this footage from 2020 is actually the X-37B on a mission. This wouldn't be the first time NASA and the US military have clashed, however, the sighting did perplex NASA as well. Imagery captured by astronauts on Skylab in 1974, decades before official government confirmation of Area 51's existence, got NASA into serious problems with the CIA. The working astronauts on the International Space Station probably have no idea where the X-37B is or what it's doing at any given time. So they would be caught off guard if it suddenly appeared in their line of sight. However, it remains uncertain whether the unidentified flying object seen in the clip from 2020 was actually the spaceplane or something else entirely. After returning to Earth, Wakayama and colleagues were able to examine the samples and compare them to mouse embryos growing under Earth's normal gravity. Unsurprisingly, the researchers found that embryos grown in a microgravity environment reached normal cell quantity when they transformed into blastocysts, a collection of proliferating cells produced by a fertilized egg. This proved beyond a reasonable doubt that gravity played no role in the blastocyst development or early stages of embryonic differentiation in mammals. Furthermore, the group discovered that blastocysts might develop into placentas and babies in mice without exhibiting any major changes in gene expression or DNA modifications if given the chance. While embryos produced on Earth had a higher survival rate, those generated on the International Space Station had a lower one. The team acknowledged that this was an important step toward verifying that blastocysts developed in microgravity are truly normal, but indicated that future work will involve transplanting blastocysts cultured in ISS's microgravity into mice to determine whether the mice can actually give birth. The impact of radiation on the development of mammalian embryos in space has not been thoroughly examined, and the researchers did not account for radiation exposure during the specific stages of live embryo cryopreservation and culturing. This aspect of the research needs to be addressed in future investigations. Humans may find all this information crucial when they start planning to transport humans to Mars, other parts of the solar system, and the Moon for extended visits or perhaps permanent settlement. In the meantime, the International Space Station will not remain in operation indefinitely due to the aging of its core structures, which include its modules, central truss, and radiators. These structures deteriorate with time due to impacts from arriving and departing vehicles, orbital reboots, and intense heat and cold cycles as the station moves in and out of sunlight each orbit. Efforts to locate and repair air leaks in the Russians' Vesta module, which is a radiator, are continuing. Meanwhile, human spaceflight is shifting from low Earth orbit to new commercially owned space stations from 2028 onwards, and the International Space Station will be deorbited by 2030 according to a plan developed in collaboration with international partners. NASA is funding the development of commercial stations and a vehicle that will assist in deorbiting the ISS when the time comes. A number of alternatives were considered by NASA for the eventual disposal of the International Space Station. One of these was to raise the station into an orbit higher than 22,000 m, a so-called graveyard orbit, where it would stay indefinitely. However, given that the ISS is currently in an orbit near 250 miles, this idea was considered too expensive and unrealistic. Dismantling the International Space Station would be a massive undertaking, requiring a lot of manpower and resources, and the majority of its modules are still using antiquated technology from the 1990s and 2000s. That's why NASA pulled the commercial space industry to see if they were interested in using any ISS modules for future stations, but they weren't. The simplest course of action for the International Space Station would be to release it into Earth's atmosphere where it would naturally disintegrate and burn up. This would occur in the event that NASA and its partners suddenly decided to abandon the station. Since, at its low altitude, the station is constantly being pulled closer to Earth by atmospheric drag, if nothing were done, it would re-enter the atmosphere within a year or two. Typically, the station gets reboosted. By means of a Russian Progress cargo ship, floating astronauts can feel the slight push. At 430 metric tons, the station covers an American football field's worth area. Unfortunately, NASA and its partners cannot send it tumbling uncontrollably into Earth's atmosphere. Some of its components will make it through the journey and fall to the surface. The re-entry must be precisely targeted so that the remaining pieces splash into a distant region of the Pacific Ocean. While Progress and other vehicles can be used to lower the ISS's altitude, NASA has decided that a dedicated spacecraft with powerful and reliable thrusters is needed for the final re-entry burn to deorbit the ISS precisely to its destination. As a result, the agency is now soliciting bids from the space industry for a spacecraft called the USD Orbit Vehicle or USDV. According to the proposal announcement, the spacecraft in question will either be completely new or modified. It is expected that the spacecraft will be able to perform adequately on its initial flight and possess adequate redundancy and anomaly recovery capabilities to sustain the key deorbit burn. The International Space Station will surpass all previous objects in size as it deorbits into Earth's atmosphere, where it will be heated by the compression and rubbing of air molecules against its surfaces. According to NASA, the station's massive solar arrays and radiators, which help maintain its coolness, are the first parts to disintegrate. The next step is for the modules to separate from the truss, which is the structural component of the station that receives power from the solar arrays. After that, the truss and modules will disintegrate, with most of the hardware vanishing into thin air and only larger fragments remaining. NASA will aim them at Point Nemo, a spot in the South Pacific Ocean named after the captain from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Point Nemo is nearly 1,700 miles from land, one of the most remote places on Earth, making it a popular place for spacecraft disposal, from the Soviet-era Mir space station to ISS cargo vehicles. As NASA has already begun to outsource the delivery of ISS crew and cargo to private businesses like SpaceX, it intends to follow suit and become a space station customer instead of an owner. Before bidding farewell to the International Space Station, in the meantime, the ISS remains a busy international science and research hub, with additional commercial astronaut missions in the works. The ISS is expected to operate at maximum capacity until it is deorbited and relegated to history. Thanks for watching another episode of Voyager. While you're still here, make sure to click the video on your screen for more mind-blowing videos about space. Even more recently, in 2021, an entire fleet of UFOs was spotted on a live stream from the ISS. What happens when there are numerous UFOs, though? When one of them can be easily disproved, alien spacecraft are probably not a cause for concern, given that NASA isn't sounding the alarm about them. Taking pictures from high enough in the sky or even in Earth's orbit makes it nearly impossible to discern what is actually visible. In contrast to casually perusing Google Maps, a whole subfield of picture interpretation is devoted to investigating instances such as these. There are no ground controls or other straightforward ways to gauge the distance or size of UFOs captured in space. Thus, it's hard to draw any firm conclusions about their potential size, even though they appear huge and distant. Your eyes and the camera lens might deceive you. Therefore, it is entirely possible that these UFOs are fragments of ordinary debris, possibly even from the same object, which explains their proximity. They might also be floating far closer to the ISS than it seems at first glance, because of the perspective issues. Additionally, keep in mind that celestial bodies in Earth's orbit travel at the speed of light, so here that may account for particularly fast-moving UFOs because, actually, they're no different from anything else. In and of itself, the International Space Station travels at speeds of more than 177,000 miles per hour. It's surrounded by a world of extremes, and it can be difficult to make sense of. This leaves a lot of space for misunderstandings and misinterpretations. When amateur astronomers view NASA live streaming, they may not always have the tools to properly examine such highly complicated images. Contrarily, when people report UFO encounters, NASA rarely provides an explanation. Since the objects may be located hundreds or even thousands of miles away, it would be impractical to dispatch astronauts to investigate the sightings. In spite of this, the International Space Station cameras will occasionally capture unexpected objects, especially with over 27,000 pieces of space trash foreign or larger being tracked by NASA. And that's before we even begin to mention all the classified spy satellites zipping about overhead. Maybe the strangest thing filmed in space, however, was an invasion of the ISS by a gorilla. This happened in 2016, and the world was shocked to see British astronaut Tim Peake chased the length and breadth of the station by the angry primate. Naturally, this was all in good fun. Fellow astronaut Scott Kelly was the one actually wearing the costume, which had been sneaked onto the station as part of a complex hoax. Despite making his terror look convincing in the clip, Peake was actually in on it. No matter how you slice it, a gorilla prank in orbit is one of the most bizarre things ever captured on NASA live broadcasts. At the same time, a foodie space mystery has finally been solved. We finally have imagery of NASA's lost space tomato, and surprise, there are two. Two small tomatoes picked by astronaut Frank Rubio aboard the International Space Station in 2022 but then mysteriously disappeared were captured on film by NASA. Rubio had momentarily stashed the food inside the Ziploc bag, but he discovered it had floated away in the interim. This serendipitous finding in the six-bedroom complex demonstrated how the 177% humidity on board impacts food in a bag. The tomatoes were discovered in a plastic bag, dehydrated and somewhat squashed, even though it has been over a year since they went missing. Though the discovery provided some comic relief for Rubio, who has already returned home from his one-year mission, NASA clarified that the true goal of cultivating crops on the ISS is to hone techniques that could be utilized in eventual missions to Mars and the Moon. Plus, the idea of feeding astronauts real food is being considered in other experiments, and there are intangible benefits to space food as well. There are more advantages to cultivating plants in space. Growing plants in space improves astronauts' mental health, which in turn improves their quality of life and boosts morale. Can humans reproduce in space? For the first time ever, scientists have been able to cultivate mouse embryos on board the ISS. This new study on mouse embryos is significant because it raises the possibility that humans may be able to procreate in outer space. The birth of the first human offspring would mark the official beginning of our species' space exploration. The landmark results come as humanity prepares to return to the Moon in conjunction with the Artemis program, which also aims to land the first woman and first person of color on the lunar surface by 2025. The establishment of lunar camps is anticipated to result from Artemis 3, even if lunar occupation at the Moon's south pole will only last around a week. The science fiction dream of off-world reproduction may one day come true, and those camps could be a stepping stone on the path to a far longer human stay in space. Molecular biologist Tariko Wakayama of the University of Yami's Advanced Biotechnology Center and colleagues from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency oversaw the experiment that grew the first embryos of mammals in space. Finding out if a mammalian fetus may develop healthily in space's low-gravity or microgravity environment was the main goal of the study. In August of 2021, a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket sent frozen embryos of mice to the International Space Station in an effort to discover the answer. Upon reaching the space station, a specialized device was used to defrost the embryos of young rats. After that, for 4 days, the embryos were cultivated in microgravity by the astronauts.